Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our How to Lead and Coach Your Team to Create Superior Value for All Stakeholders webinar. We are joined by Professor Peter Hawkins today, who I'm delighted to introduce. Peter Hawkins is Professor of Leadership at Henley Business School and founder and chairman of Renewal Associates. He is a leading consultant, writer, and researcher in leadership and leadership development, and an international thought leader in executive teams and systematic team coaching. He has just led a major global research project on tomorrow's leadership and the necessary revolution in today's leadership development. Just a quick reminder that if you have any questions for Peter throughout this session, please use the online function and he will aim to answer as many as he can prior to close today. Okay, I think that's as ready to go on. Everything seems to be fine. So I'll now hand you over to Peter to begin the session.
Thank you very much, Julie, and welcome to everyone who's joined us. Good afternoon just in Europe, and good morning to anyone joining us from America, and good evening to anyone who stayed up late in Asia or Australia. Delighted to be able to join you and discuss how you can lead and coach your own team to create value, not just for team members, but for your customers, your employees, your investors, and all the stakeholders of the team. I will be stopping after about 20 minutes and after about 40 minutes to answer any questions that come in. So please do put those in the chat box so that Julie can see the questions coming in, and she'll choose some that we could use at each of the stopping points so we can make this really interactive. I've been involved with leading organizations, coaching organizations, and consulting organizations for over 30 years. And in that time, coaching has grown and developed and achieved a great deal. It's become the most popular form of leadership development because it's taken leadership development out of the classroom, personalized it, and allowed people to have personalized leadership development focusing on current and future issues. There's high satisfaction ratings. When I was first a leader, that's going way back into the early 1970s, many managers and leaders had IQs that were at least 10 times greater than their EQ or their emotional intelligence. And coaching has done a lot to focus on how do we become more self-aware and grow our relationship skills that are so critical to being a manager or a leader. We see the growth of internal coaching, and of managers and leaders being trained in coaching skills, and the introduction of supervision so that coaches are always learning and developing. And I've been writing a lot in the last 10 years about team coaching and systemic team coaching, and we'll talk a bit about that today. But I want to suggest that what's made coaching and leaders successful in the last 30 years is not what's needed for the next 30 years. That what's got us to here won't get us to there. That the needs of leadership in the 21st century are going to be very different than the world of heroic leaders in the 20th century. Indeed, it was early in 2009 that I was speaking at a large conference just after the international financial crisis of 2008 and early 2009. And I was commenting on the fact that we know that many of the banks that ran into trouble, Lehman Brothers, Royal Bank of Scotland, and many others, did a lot around coaching their leaders and coaching their teams. And I posed the question, what were the coaches doing while the banks were burning? And a man at the back of the audience put his hand up and said, and I said to him, what were they doing? And he said, the coaches were all sending in their invoices quickly. And I thought, what an indictment of the coaching profession. What can we learn from that crisis which could help us look at the question, what can coaching do that can help us see the crisis before the crisis happens, help us with our willful blindness, help us with the things we're not seeing, not hearing, not saying, and not doing. And in this talk, I want to suggest that the challenges of the world mean that it is no longer okay just to be coaching managers and people who report to us on their current performance, but we need to be growing their capacity to be able to be fit for the future and the challenges it will bring. I often go back to this formula that was started by Reg Revens, the founder of Action Learning. He said organizational learning must equal or be greater than the speed at which the environment is changing. I call it the Darwinian law of organizational survival. It's not having the best products or even the best processes that in today's world makes you most successful. It's the ability to learn faster than your environment is changing and faster than your competitors. And if the world is changing that fast, and we know that the speed of change is still increasing and becoming more complex and more interdependent, this means that constantly we're having to re-strategize. When I was a young leader, strategy was something you did once every 5 years with a strategic plan. You took the old strategy off the shelf, you blew the dust off it, you changed the figures and resubmitted it. But in today's world, strategy is not even an annual event or a monthly event. It's something that you're constantly attending to weekly and daily. But there's a great quote from Peter Drucker that says, culture will always eat your strategy for breakfast. It's no good just changing the strategy to meet the changing needs if we're not shifting the organizational culture and the team cultures within it. And we know from hard experience that shifting your strategy is far easier than changing your culture. If we think about changing culture, we have another one line that joins up the southeast corner of this little model. It says, leadership get the culture they collectively behave. If we want to shift the organizational culture to deliver the strategy that the changing environment needs, we need to start by looking at how do we shift the collective leadership culture, not what individuals do, but what happens in their collective joined up leadership. And that's where coaching your own team becomes really important. I often reduce strategy to one question. It's a question you can use as an individual, or you can use with your team and ask, what can this team uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? You can ask it as an organization or a function, or indeed as a country. And if we look at that question, it's not asking, what can we do that our customers of today want? But what is it that we can uniquely do that no other part of the system can do? That no other team in this organization can do? That the world of tomorrow needs? And when I asked that question about 8 or 9 years ago, somebody said, well, what is it, Peter, what's your answer to that question? And I went off for about 3 days retreat to try and answer that question myself, and decided that the 5 people keeping me working were these 5 people. Their names are, from left to right, Iris, Florence, Nancy, Charlie, and Freddie. These are my 5 grandchildren. And why are they the people that are keeping me working beyond retirement age? I'm probably more busy than I've ever been, despite being in my late 60s. And the reason they're keeping me working is not the answer that was given to me by a large conference of accountants. They said, well, it's obvious why they're keeping you working, Peter. You're probably paying for the housing costs of all the parents of these grandchildren. And I was able to say to them, no, that's not why they're keeping me working, because I dealt with that by selling my own consultancy business. The reason they're keeping me working is that the one thing I know about the future is that these 5 little people, if they get through school, through university, go out into the world of work and become leaders, they will face far, far bigger and more complex leadership challenges than anything that my privileged generation has had to face. And if I lived long enough, and I was still around in 30 years, and they come to me as adults and they say, Grandpa, what were you leaders doing while you were creating a VUCA world? That's a world that's volatile, unpredictable, complex and ambiguous. And what were you coaches and you leaders doing in your greatly privileged world when you were leaving us a legacy of a world of greater demand, growing expectations and diminishing resources? You see, I have the privilege of traveling to many different countries. In the last 5 years, I have consulted, coached and taught in 50 different countries, from China to South America to from Scandinavia to South Africa. And wherever I've gone, I never meet any organization that is not suffering from what I call the unholy trinity. That is, they're having to face a world where they are having to do more at higher quality with less resource. And if we look at why that is true, the world's population today is 7.6 billion people. Now you might just pause and think, what do you think the world's population was the year I was born? If you've been listening, you'll have some idea of the year I was born. So just write down for yourself, what do you think that world's population was in terms of billions of people? If it's 7.6 billion today, and the average prediction is that we'll get to between 9 and 10 billion by 2050. When I ask this around the world, I get answers that vary from 1 billion to 6 billion. Well, for those people who've put down 1 billion, I'm not quite that old. I'd have had to have been born in the year 1830 to be around when the world's population was 1 billion. But when I was born, it was 2.4 billion people. This means that I have seen the world's population treble in my own lifetime, something that has not happened for any previous generation in the whole history of Homo sapiens. But then I would argue that population increase has been exponential, but we have had an even bigger exponential growth in expectations. The internet has brought many blessings and has connected the world so that I could be speaking to you from my office in Bath, on the edge of Bath in the UK, and be talking to people in many countries in the world. But the internet has also meant that the rest now know what the best are getting. Anything we do could be benchmarked against the best in the world. And I would argue that we have exponentially grown expectations even faster than the population. And the World Bank research shows us that today we are using over 1.5 Earth's worth of primary resources every year. And with growing population and growing customer expectations, if we continue on the trajectory of today, we would need 5 Earths to support the expectations and the needs by 2050. And the one thing we know is we've only got 1 Earth. So this means that there are enormous challenges for all leaders to do more at higher quality with less resource, and that the days of incremental change are no longer possible. We're having to innovate in quantum step change beyond anything we've done previously. So last year, there's something gone slightly strange to this slide, I apologize. But last year, I completed 2 years of research talking to CEOs, HR directors, and millennial future leaders from over 40 different companies from around the world, across sectors in finance, government, retail, consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, many different sectors, insurance. And I asked them, what did they see as the 3 to 5 largest challenges that were facing their organization in the next 5 to 10 years? And in order of priority here, these are the ones that were most mentioned. Number one, which links to what I've already shared, was unceasing and accelerating transformation. One CEO said, we've been talking about the VUCA world for 10 years now. But now, today, for the first time, we're living it every day and every week. The second most common was the technological and digital revolution. And many people talk about the fourth industrial revolution, which isn't going to come from just one source like the first three industrial revolutions did. The first industrial revolution was built on steam, the second on electricity, the third on computers. This fourth industrial revolution is about how artificial intelligence, digitalization, robotics, 3D printing, medical science, all of these different areas of fast scientific improvement are cross-pollinating to create an extraordinary range of change. And the third, and here I learned a new word, the verb to be Uberized, where CEOs talk to me about their fear and their anticipation that their whole industry could be suddenly disintermediated, the whole way the industry currently operates. So insurance leaders talk to me about when Amazon enter the insurance industry, which will happen sooner or later, they will overnight change the whole way the insurance industry operates. One CEO in New York, who ran a very successful global business, said to me, Peter, I wake up every morning terrified. He said, I'm terrified that what makes us number one and successful today will no longer be relevant within the next 3 to 5 years. And if we just stick to that, we'll be dead in the water. But he also said, if I chase every innovation that's out there, we're also going to be dead in the water. And so how, he said, do I run an organization where I'm having to have one part of my organization disrupt what makes us successful today? And how do I get those two bits of organization to work together? The fourth, down there in the pink, was most CEOs said, look, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be employing far less people because of digitalization, robotics, AI, outsourcing. We'll have less employees. But yet they pointed out to me that they'll also have far more stakeholders that would be critical to their success and who they would need to partner with. So the whole nature of leadership is changing from thinking about leading my people, my team, my function, my organization, to how do I partner right across my business ecosystem with people who might be competitors at one moment and partners at another? How do I lead people who don't report to me, who aren't dependent upon me for their pay and bonuses? And then just briefly to mention the other three, globalization, the fact that whether you're a small company in one part of one country, it's quite likely that your customers, your suppliers, your investors may be globalized, even if you're just in one location. Particularly the millennials talked about climate change, even more than the CEOs or the HR directors, and how that will have impact on all the other changes. And the seventh, completing the cycle, comes back to our formula. We are going to need to learn and adapt faster. So those are the 7 large changes. And what they were basically saying is that disruption is now the new norm. You're either, as Peter Diamandis says, he is the head, the CEO of Singularity University in Silicon Valley. You're either disrupting yourself or someone else's. Sitting still equals death. So what we need is teams that are not only efficient, have great meetings, are well organized, but teams that are constantly learning, constantly able to disrupt themselves and be creating the future. So in my book on leadership team coaching, which is not just about bringing in an external team coach, but how CEOs, leaders of teams can coach their own teams, I highlight these challenges. That any team leader has got to manage expectations of different and sometimes conflicting stakeholders, the needs of employees, of customers, partner organizations, investors, regulators. And because of that, I often say that many of the teams that I work with don't have too much conflict, but too little conflict. And by that, I talk about requisite conflict, that a leadership team should have no more or no less conflict than the system that it is giving leadership to. If we're not holding the conflict between our investors, our customers, our employees, our communities within the team, then the conflict is happening out there in our system and we're not processing it. I've already talked about running the business and transforming it, but there's a lovely quote from a CEO who said to me, Peter, my job is like flying an aircraft at 40,000 feet and having to rebuild the plane while in mid-flight. He said, what's more, I'm having to manage my team on the flight deck, my team who are the cabin crew and looking after all the passengers who are on board. At the same time, I'm having to talk to ground control, look at what is the climate coming over the horizon. He said, that's what it's like to be a CEO today. We're having to work on many time horizons. In fact, I would thoroughly recommend to you a little book called 3 Horizons, which says that any team leader is having to manage 3 time horizons simultaneously. Horizon 1 is managing business as usual, the business of today. Horizon 2 is managing innovating for tomorrow. So Horizon 3 is looking at what's coming over the horizon. And what he argues in this little book is that we need to not do our Horizon 2 thinking, our innovation out of Horizon 1, because that will be just incrementally improving today's game. We have to do Horizon 2 innovation by first thinking what's going to come over the horizon from the world of tomorrow. We're all having to be members of multiple teams, work with systemic conflict, deal with a more complex and interconnected world, and increasingly many of our teams are virtual. If you go on my website, you can see a short video I've done on VIM teams, teams that are virtual, international, and multicultural. And finally, as one CEO said to me, Peter, I've got many coaches who coach my individual leaders and many consultants that consult to functions within my organization, but that's not where the challenges lie. He said, all my challenges increasingly lie not in the parts or in the people, but in the connections. What we need is external people and internal people who can help coach and consult to the connections between people, between teams, between functions, and between our organization and its stakeholders and partners. So those are some of the challenges for teams. And just to say that before I go on to, well, what can we do about it? A little puzzle for you. What way are these 3 the same? And to save time, I'm not interested in the arithmetical answer. But if we look at number 1, and we have 6 people in a team and we count the heads, then number 1 is true. Unfortunately, when we look at many leadership teams, and we look at the productivity of the team of 6 people, then number 2 is true. But number 3 is possible. And I want to suggest to you today that the reason we often end up with number 2 being true, when number 3 could be, is because we know far more about how to manage, coach, and develop the ones than we do about understanding the pluses, developing the spaces between people, between teams, between functions. And that is something that's becoming critically more important. So let me just say we need to ask, how do we gear up for tomorrow's needs? And how do we move from a hub and spoke team to a team of collective leadership that is more than the sum of its parts? Because as I wrote in an article about 5 years ago, I would suggest the age of the heroic CEO is gone. The heroic CEO is dead. We now need to look at how do we create teams that are more than some of their parts and can take collective leadership. So let me just pause there, Julie. Just ask, have any questions come in that might be useful to answer at this stage before we move on to what leaders can do about it?
Sure, absolutely. We've had a couple of questions come in. So the first one, is leadership really needing to be different going forward?
Well, yes, I often meet people who say, well, hasn't leadership always been the same, even back into classical times of Romans and Greeks? And many aspects of being an individual leader and what you need to do, yes, they are eternal. Things like integrity, authenticity, a sense of ethical maturity, being able to make decisions. But the whole context has changed. The complexity of living in a globally interconnected world with some of the challenges I've outlined means that you can no longer afford to have the only point of integration of an organization being the CEO. And where their leadership team of the HR leader looks after the people and the sales director looks after the customers, and the finance director looks after the investors. Those days, that way of thinking no longer works for leadership. If the only person who can represent your team is the team leader, and everyone else just represents their individual function, you'll never cope with the growing complexity of your stakeholder world. We need leadership teams where everyone owns the collective journey, not just their part of it. So I hope that kind of addresses that question, Julie. Great question.
Yes, that was great. Thank you. And then I've got one more here for just now. Why is focusing on the team so important?
Well, it relates to my last answer. Because if you are a CEO or a leader of a function, you're just not going to keep up if you're having to manage businesses, the Horizon 1 business of today, and you're not getting your people to resolve issues between you. I was working with a CEO just recently, and I was looking at the fact that he was overwhelmed and was helping him with this. And part of what he was overwhelmed with is that if the IT director had difficulties with HR, they would come and tell the CEO about that rather than resolve it together. You've got to, as a team leader, make sure that anything that can be resolved horizontally across your team is resolved horizontally. You've got to make sure that you're not the only one who's doing the stakeholders. You've got to build a team that can co-lead with you. And also the complexity is such that we need the wisdom of the whole team to deal with the complex and wicked issues, not just individual solution making. So let me pick up from that, Julie, go on to some of the things, then we'll stop again. What can we do about it? First of all, let me say, after much research on effective teams around the world, I looked at all the best research that's been produced. I came up with this model, which we've used now with teams, as I said earlier, in about 50 countries. And we've developed a whole 360-degree team feedback, which feedbacks not on the individuals in the team, but the collective team. It's called Team Connect 360. And it suggests that this model that I created, that there are 5 core disciplines that every team must have. Up in the top right corner is commissioning. That comes from the outside. Your commission is, what is your purpose as a team? What is it that the team needs to do collaboratively that they cannot achieve by working in parallel to each other? The commission partly comes from the board, if you're the top team, or from the more senior team above you. It's why are you a team? What is your collective purpose? But your commission also comes from your customers, the people who report to you, your stakeholders. So the first job a team needs to do is to be clear about its purpose. And if it doesn't have a purpose that requires it to collaborate, then it's a work group. It's not a team. It's only a real team if it's got a collective purpose that requires people to collaborate to achieve it. Once we're clear about the why, up in the external top right, we move across the top of this model to clarifying, where we come internally. And that's the work of the team where they have to, having taken and clarified and being all on the same page about their purpose, they need to look at how do we therefore clarify what it is we need to focus on? What are our strategic priorities? Most top teams I've worked with have had to develop team KPIs, the things that can only be achieved through our collaboration that we're collectively responsible for. So collective goals, collective objectives, and clarity of roles. And from that, teams need to develop a very clear team charter so that they can understand how they can be more than the sum of their parts. So the top two are the why and the what. Then we come down to the bottom left, which is the how. This is the traditional area of where team coaching is mostly focused. But I would argue we can only work on the team culture and the team dynamic if we know what it is the team need to deliver and why and the purpose of the team. But the co-creating is also about how do we change our team meetings. I was working with one of the big 4 professional services firms and was staggered to discover that many senior partners spend up to 30 hours a week in internal meetings. I set them the challenge. Could they halve the number of hours they spent in meetings and double the impact and value that those meetings create? And believe it or not, it was possible. Many partners managed to do that, but it takes real commitment and skill and some techniques on how do you have outcome-based meetings, not agenda-based meetings. But that's all in the co-creating box. So we've done the why, the what, the how, and then we come across to the bottom right, connecting. An effective team is not one that just is very committed when they're together in team meetings. Team meetings don't create value. The value is created by what happens when the team members are out working separately, connecting with all the stakeholders. This is where value is created, with customers, with investors, through our employees. And therefore, in the connecting discipline, we need to have a very clear stakeholder map. We need to know who's leading on what, how we have joined up messaging from the whole team to our panoply of different stakeholders. And arguably, that's where we create value. And we can be doing all 4 of these outside disciplines. But if we're not doing the 5th discipline of core learning, we are becoming better and better at winning yesterday's game, not developing the capacity to win at tomorrow's game. And of the 150 to 200 teams around the world that we have got data on from the 360-degree team feedback, core learning is the lowest score in 90% of those teams. So this is worrying because it means that most teams are so submerged by business as usual, they're not developing the capacity to be future fit. And this journey to be a highly effective team in all 5 disciplines has implications for the team leader. Many team leaders that we work with start off not even as team leaders, but what we would call team managers. This is where you go around trying to manage all the individuals and their functions. You know, on Monday you go off and you see your sales director, make sure the sales figures are doing well. And then you rush off and see your finance director and make sure we're getting the revenue in and we've got the profitability right. And then you rush off and you see the HR director. Now, are we managing all the recruitment and the talent management and the succession management? And it's like you're spinning the plates and you are the hub through which everything goes. And then you start to become overwhelmed and you realize, no, I shouldn't be doing that. I should be getting everyone to step up to manage business as usual by themselves. I should be stepping back and focusing on the collective goals, the vision, the purpose. However, even as team leader, even if you get the whole team to buy into your vision and your purpose and your strategy, often what happens is at the end of the year that they all take responsibility for their part of delivering it, but you're left ensuring that the whole that's delivered is more than the sum of the parts. It's a bit like going, if any of you have been to a restaurant and you've been left paying the bill and everyone's put into the pot what they think they've eaten, the money for what they've eaten and what they've drunk, but somehow the bill is more than the sum of what everyone's eaten, and you're left with the responsibility. That's often what it feels like to be a team leader. You're left with the responsibility for the whole, and the team are only taking responsibility for their parts. And the third stage we think of that team leaders need to mature into, and we've helped many team leaders do this, is becoming the team orchestrator, focusing on the pluses, not just the ones. How do you get the right connections between people? And you say to people, don't come and tell me what's wrong with the IT department. You know, they're two offices down the corridor. Go and tell them directly. But also, how do you orchestrate the relationships externally and get people to have the right connections with the right stakeholders, with the right conversations? And the fourth and final stage is becoming team coach, where you can focus on that fifth discipline of team learning. And you're ensuring that month on month, quarter on quarter, the capacity of the team to do more at higher quality with less resource is growing. And the team as a whole is growing its capacity to be future fit. And this journey means that we have different performance measures. As team manager, we may focus on the individual key performance indicators of the individuals. As team leader, we might be linking those to the organization's mission and the team objectives that we've done in the team charter. As team orchestrator, we may be going on to formulating team KPIs and then looking at how each individual is contributing to achieving those. By the time we become team coach, we every quarter have team development goals. What's the new capacities we need to develop collectively and individually? And we're looking at shifting what is the behaviors we're expecting of our team members. We're not expecting them just to turn up and report on their function, but to align their functions goals to the overall purpose and objectives. We're expecting them to be able to work collaboratively with peers and stakeholders and to take joint ownership of the corporate and team goals and represent the whole team to others. This is a model I developed and road tested, and when I published it in the second edition and now in the third edition of Leadership Team Coaching, I sent it to 4 CEOs who I'd worked with in 4 different countries. And I said, look, I'm only going to publish tools and techniques that you have tried, tested, and have worked for you in taking your team on that journey. So let me just pause and see if, Julie, has any more questions come in from those listening?
Yep, we've got a couple more here. The first one being, can you give us some examples of teams you've worked with in the financial sector?
Yeah, one of the very first teams that I worked with, which were a FTSE 100 company, were a financial business, international financial business. And I remember this was back in the 1990s. And one of the first breakthroughs when I was working with them was I sat with the CEO and his team, And I find myself saying, I'm fed up with all you team members telling me what's wrong with your CEO. And there was a sudden kind of feeling of ice in the room. The CEO turned and looked at me, and I said, listen, I think you're telling me about his weaknesses and not telling him. And I think you're working on the assumption that you're waiting to have the perfect CEO, or you're waiting to become the perfect CEO. And let me tell you, I've got some bad news. I've never met a perfect CEO. So when are you as a team going to start taking responsibility for his weaknesses? And that's when the team started to shift. Yeah? Because I think it's really, we have to kind of break our mythology. There are such things as perfect CEOs. And we know that the tenure of CEOs is getting less and less. And I think rather than look for the perfect CEO, we've got to start to look for the effective leadership team. What was the other question, Julie?
Sure. The other question was, what about virtual teams spread across different parts of the world? How do you work with those?
It's I did mention that little video I've done, that the virtual teams had some very specific challenges. And I would say it's even harder if you're working as a virtual team and you've never got together and never met in person. So where possible, I do advise virtual teams to at least have a team launch event where they actually get the team together, because I found that investment well worthwhile. But then what I think is really important is to still go around those 5 disciplines and look at how do we ensure that when we're having our team calls, we're doing those in a way that has a time not just to look at managing business as usual, but how are we developing and clarifying our team purpose and our team roles. And that's even more important if we're not meeting on a day-to-day basis. That clarity of the team charter is even more crucial. And then also, how are we having some time on the team calls, not just to deal with the content, but to stop and do a time out and look at the process of how the team's operating. And besides that, and I write a little bit about that there are some skills in knowing how to, just to give one example, that the chairman of the team call, often the team leader, has to know how to listen to silence on the line and listen to non-verbal signals, which are auditory, in order to know when to bring people in. And that's a skill which is very different than leading a team that's live in the room with you. Were there any others, Julie, or do you want me to...
Yep, I've just had one come through right now, actually. How many CEOs have you met who admit they have weaknesses?
Well, most CEOs that I have worked with, and I've worked with quite a lot, admit they have weaknesses. Very few of them admit that in the first meeting, and very few of them admit that when they're on the stage in public. Yeah? But we've done a lot of work with not just CEOs, but team leaders at all stages, where I think learning a new language, and I'll give you 3 examples, has been very important for them. For a CEO to be able to say, not, here's my strategy, here's my vision, but this is the challenge we've got as an organization. This is the challenge we've got as a team. And the we there is really important. Yeah? And then to say, the next line, and I need the help of everyone in this team to address that challenge. Yeah? And I think that ability, not only to admit weakness, but to ask for help, is becoming more and more critical. The leader's job is not to provide the solutions and to go into tell and sell, or just to ask the team members, what do you think the solution is? Because I find that either telling or asking doesn't work. The job of the team leader is to articulate the key challenges and then to facilitate the whole team engaging in collectively solving that issue themselves. Well, when we did a study of transformation in organizations, we discovered that the reason that so many fail is that people try and cascade the solution before people have bought into the problem. And we came up with this phrase: if people haven't bought into the problem, they're not going to buy into the solution. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. So if you want people not to resist change, you've got to get them to be part of creating the solution with you, not having it cascaded down upon them. So that was a rather long answer to a very good and short question. So I better move on while we've still got time. So let me just say, if you're coaching your own team, I in my latest edition of my book talk about 4 levels of team coaching. The first is kind of seeing the team as created by the individuals and focusing on the interrelationships and the individuals and how they get on together, and looking for them to understand and have good harmony. That was the traditional team coaching. And as I suggested, that the more and more the research suggests that's not what makes the difference. Good relationships are helpful, but they're not the primary thing that will make a difference. So the second level was all about the system team coaching, which is starting to realize that as a team leader, you have to focus on the team as a whole, the team dynamic, focusing on how the team can be more than some of its parts. And here we look at effective meetings. How can meetings generate new thinking that nobody had before they came into the meeting, what we call generative dialogue? But here again, I think, as I said earlier, having great meetings doesn't make you a great team. So what I did in developing team coaching was to say we've got to focus not just the team when it's together, but the team when it's apart. How do we coach our team and our team members as a team leader when they're out there doing their town halls, when they're talking to their people, when they're engaging with customers? And how do we change that stakeholder interface? But I'm also suggesting, and this was new to my latest edition, that we also need to think about the ecosystem, the business ecosystem. So one of the things I've done recently to accelerate development in a large financial company is they asked me to come in and coach their senior team. And I said, listen, I'll only do that if at the same time I can coach a shadow leadership team of millennial future leaders drawn from across the business, across genders, across diversity. And we've got the shadow millennial team to work on the same issues that the executive team are working on. But I learned from hard experience, if you just get the young millennial team to come and report back to the senior team, all that happens is that the senior team listens to them very attentively, pat them on the back and say, oh, well done, very good thinking, we'll take that into consideration. And the senior team become patronizing and nothing changes. So now I insist on coaching the dialogue between the shadow leadership team and millennials and the executive team. And one of the things I do is I get them to be responsible for shifting the mindsets of the other group. I say to the millennials, I'm going to score you on how many mindset shifts you get in your senior leadership team. And I say to the senior leaders, I'm going to score you on how many mindset shifts you get in the young group of millennials. And that makes them, if you like, responsible for accelerating the coaching and development of the other group. And then I might say, all right, there's a critical issue here that you've both done some thinking on. Now we're going to spend half an hour together coming up with thinking that goes beyond the thinking that you've done separately. So now I'm helping them do generative dialogue, not just within teams, but across teams. And increasingly, we're having to help organizations partner, because partnerships with other companies, with other suppliers, is becoming more and more critical. You know, I talked to 2 Chinese organizations, and I was asking them about their sales department. They said, look, we don't have a sales department. All our sales is done by our customers. We just have a small group of people who organize great gatherings for our customers to equip them to be our sales force. And I asked them about their R&D department. And they said, oh, no, all our R&D is done by global competitions. We have a small group that just organise that. And so they were seeing that their workforce was 10 times, 100 times greater than the people on their payroll. And how you work with the human capital that's not on your payroll becomes a great challenge. And how you develop that human capital becomes also a great challenge. So let me just have a final, no, I'll just say a couple of other things. I mentioned a couple of these, but here are a few other areas where you could start to think about how do we not just get change within the team, but between teams. So in a South African company, my colleagues have been working with, and I've come down to support them. They've been working with 8 different teams within the same company. And then we've brought them all together in one room and got them to present what they've done to develop and make more effective their own team and get feedback from the other teams on what they've noticed and what they've seen. And then what we've done is we've got each team to say, look, to take our development to the next stage, this is what we need from you, the executive. This is what we need from you, the finance department. This is what we need from you, the operations department. This is what we need from you, the retail department. And so we've done some live inter-team negotiation live in the room. And this links to a very good book. If you get the chance, do go and read it, by General McChrystal. He was a person who was left running the multinational force in Iraq after the Iraq War. And he woke up one day to realize that he had the best equipped, the best resourced, the best trained army in the world. And yet he was being totally outmaneuvered by small cells of terrorists. And that meant he had to rethink his whole way about thinking about organizations. And he poses this question about how do we get organizations to have as much trust and quality of relationships between teams as within teams? So I'm just encouraging you not just to think about how do you move from team manager to team leader to team orchestrator to team coach, but how do you become an active culture change agent in your own organization, bringing teams together to look at how do we become partners and synergistic in the way we connect between teams, not just within teams. And also I've talked a bit about shadow boards and shadow leadership teams, but also how do we have the relationship between edge teams? These are internal disruptive startups working on, if you like, that third horizon of creating our business of tomorrow. And how do we get the right relationship between that and the rest of the business so both are learning from the other? And just to end before I take some final questions, my next book is going to be called We Q, because if the last period of development has all been about how do we move from the over-focus on IQ to also focusing on EQ, I want to suggest that the next period of time will be about how do we move from IQ to WeQ, to collaborative intelligence. And that is collaborative intelligence within teams and between teams, and to effective collective leadership that could create future fit organizations. And for those of you who work in HR or strategy or learning development or coaching, I said I was a keynote speaker at the recent HR conference in South Africa. And I said, look, you might think you're looking at an Englishman in a suit and tie who's pale, male and grey, and think, what could he teach us down here in Africa? But underneath that suit, I think, is a revolutionary. And part of the revolution that I'm suggesting is that within 5 years, we won't have separate strategy, HR, learning and development and coaching. We'll just have one function called the Fit for the Future function, or the Future Fit function, because the urgent need is to have a function that all of those are working together to co-evolve the organizational capacity, the team capacity, the individual capacity to be fit for the future that's constantly coming over the horizon. So that's been we've gone through a lot. So let me just see, Julie, is there any kind of final questions that have come in?
Yes, I've got one here for you. If you had just 3 pieces of advice to me as a team leader, what would they be?
Well, the first would be to stop trying to be the heroic leader, to think what are the top challenges that you need to articulate to your team. And when they turn to you and say, so what's the answer to that challenge? You say to them, I've no idea, but it sounds like that's what we're going to have to work out together. So you stop trying to be the person who is leading from the front and become the person who's mobilizing their collective thinking and their collective responsibility and their mutual accountability. The second bit of advice would be to look at how you can halve the length of your team meetings and double the impact. And the third one would be to ensure that all the conversations aren't going through you in team meetings or in the rest of the week, but you are enabling them to have the right conversations with each other in the team and the right conversations between every team member and the growing number of stakeholders is going to be critical for your team to have to succeed. Those would be my top 3.
Great, thank
which
you.
Summarizes some of the earlier stuff.
Yes.
And one last question I think we've got time for.
Yeah, I was just about to say we've got one last question that's just come through. What would be your one quick tip for initiating successful cultural change in long-standing businesses?
The one quick tip is to realize that you can't do culture change either top down or bottom up. Yeah? The job of the top is to articulate the why the culture needs to change. And I would link that to the strategy and link that to what's coming over the horizon. So the job of the top is to articulate the challenge and then to set up the infrastructure whereby the people who are going to be part of the future leadership of the organization, the millennials, the people in the middle, can come together across difference to start to respond to that challenge. And then to get those different groups into the room as a whole system, kind of bringing that together. Make the key parts of the organization that are responsible for implementing the culture change to be those that are creating it. So I hope that helps. And if you do want a copy of the research on tomorrow's leadership and the necessary revolution in today's leadership development, if you send me an email and I put my address up there, I'll be happy to send you one.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Peter. You've certainly given us some great points to take away and think about. Also, for listeners, if you'd like to continue your research on this topic, we've included a link to where you can buy Peter's books in the attachment tabs. Alongside this, you can download a copy of today's slides, and there's also a link for Peter's LinkedIn page where he regularly shares related blog posts as well. I'd just like to ask one final favour of our audience to please remember to give us a rating and some feedback on today's session so we can keep delivering what you'd like to hear. And then finally, I'd just like to say thanks again to Peter. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and advice today. And also thanks to everyone at home for joining us. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.